As in the Russian Revolution, the implementers of our progressive revolution have one thing in mind: kill the bourgeoisie with all of its niceties and comportments. The cohesion of families, much as the church, is a bulwark against totalitarian governments. Therefore, it must be destroyed. These prescient words were scribed by Sigrid Weidenweber in her book, The Beauty of Liberty, My Life in Freedom. The bourgeoisie, or middle class, or in America, I think the direct translation is religion-clinging Costco shoppers, believe in not ourselves or the world, or even science, the science, but in God and reason and universal truth. There's been something of an underground revival of belief in the divine power of truth, beauty, and goodness, and its impact on mere mortals. It's a common theme of countries that have prospered throughout history. As data scientists would say, there's a pattern. Truth, beauty, and goodness are the bedrock of our existence, that upon which Christian intellectual tradition rests along with the timeless and universal attributes of being. These are all important, but today we talk about the thing that gives truth, beauty, and goodness: oxygen. But for this attribute, on earth as it is in heaven, turns into on earth as it is on earth. That one thing is courage. We know it when we see it. We can't help but be inspired by its stories. As humans, we intrinsically navigate toward courage and hope for its victory. Once known for its courage, the U.S. is experiencing a slough. There remain many places around the country where church services are severely truncated and altered by state action. Sadly, the complicity of the faithful makes this possible. You can't overcome a reason-based, God-seeking people, right? The U.S. is truly at a crossroads, as is her church. The Holy Spirit descended in the upper room and turned a fearful lot into brave speakers of truth. It is clear we also need such inspiration to courage. Today, we have the great fortune of speaking with the author, lecturer, perhaps one of the greatest persons of courage that I have met in my lifetime, Sigrid Weidenweber. Sigrid's body of work includes 9 books, many columns, and more. Hers is a voice of history and reason that is so greatly needed in today's moment of chaos and nearly daily power grab for all that we hold dear. Sigrid, it is an honor to have you on the show.
Thank you so very much. It is a pleasure to be here.
Your life has been touched in significant ways by courageous Catholics, maybe most notably during your escape from East Germany. Tell us that story.
Well, it was in 1961 when the communists closed the border between East and West Berlin. I unfortunately lived in East Berlin at the time, and for a while, some students and I tried to still escape through this wall that they had erected, and it was impossible. We tried for months, and then when I had already given up, I got a phone call from a young man who wanted to have a blind date. Blind dates were not my thing, so I tried to discourage him, and he had such a nice way of telling me that I really should see him. And it would be just a movie and fun. We would meet in front of a movie theater, and if I didn't like him, I could leave. And during this speech, something happened. I started to get these feelings that I should go, that something momentous was attached to this invitation to see him. And so the next day, I was there again, sheer intuition. I put on my best clothes and I went to this movie theater, and he had told me he would see me and know me by a newspaper that I was to carry under my arm. He would do the same thing. So I arrived. There was no young man there, all older pensioners. And I was ready to give up when suddenly I got a little peck from behind on the cheek, and a voice quite loudly said, "Well, hello, cousin, so good to see you again." And when I turned around, there was a young Catholic priest, and that floored me. I mean, I just froze. And he whispered in my ear, since he had come over my shoulder, "Just play along." And I did. So he said quite loudly again for everyone to hear, because there were always spies who would report on other citizens. Let us walk across the street in the park and talk about so many things that we haven't talked for a long time about. We still have half an hour before the movie starts. And as we walked across the street into a little park, he then urgently told me, "Pick up this newspaper under my arm and replace it with yours. In the newspaper is a passport, a French passport, and your picture will be in it. And now I will leave you. You have to go into a restaurant, go in the bathroom, check all your clothes for labels, and if you want to leave, you can leave East Berlin today." So he left, and I went into a restaurant close by, went in the bathroom, pulled the labels from my shoes that were labels of a communist factory. The clothes that I wore were my grandmother's. She made my clothes. The coat also had a label from an East German factory. I tore this one out. And then I left for the border. There were Bahnhof Friedrichstraße. You could go through several double posts, probably 10 of East German soldiers, and they directed questions at me. And of course, I couldn't answer them. I was French, so I just shook my shoulders and kept on walking until the actual checkpoint came into view. There were two tables. One was on one, two women were seated. They looked ferocious. I think bulldog came to mind when I saw them. And on the other table to the left, there was a man who probably also was not a very nice person, but he looked more approachable than the women. So I stood there and literally prayed. I prayed that the person occupying the attention of the women would stay there for a few moments longer so I would be able to go to the man. Now, I had a French passport, but I didn't speak any French. And the priest had told me that there was a chance there was a French interpreter at the border, and that might get me into trouble. I knew exactly what kind of chance I was taking, because we all knew you either went to jail or you went to the uranium mines. A friend of mine had ended up there. So that moment when the man became free and I walked to his table, he asked me for money, currency. And he kept on repeating it in German, and I pretended not to understand. And he got frustrated and then said, "Money, money." So I knew he didn't speak French. And I also didn't speak English. So that was probably the only word I knew. And I showed him my little purse, and I had a little bit of East German money in there, and I had 3 best marks with some change that had been in the passport for me to use on the other side. Also in the passport had been a card for the train. There were still two systems going, an underground and the S-Bahn, which was above ground. And I wanted to be in the S-Bahn because it would end out in the West quicker than the underground. If I was caught behind the lines, and there was no way I could have had a ticket that was already marked and stamped in the West, but I did. They had thought about that, and he had also told me once I would safely be in the West, I should go to a certain room. He had given me a number at the Free University in West Berlin. Now, the entire time while this was happening, I was quite brave, I thought, and I had this feeling there was a presence beside me that was very protective. And once I had passed the male interrogator, and I was allowed to get up the steps to the S-Bahn, I started to walk up the steps and I realized that I was free and the presence disappeared. And that moment, my knees buckled because all my courage, everything left me. And I practically pulled myself up with my arm because I could hardly walk. I was so frightened and relieved, frightened, everything at once. And once I was in a train going out, then I could recover a little bit, but there was still enough fear in me until I would be at the first West station where I could get out, that they still could have apprehended me because they would go through the trains and sort of do searches of the passengers. Well, when I arrived in the West, I went to the university as I had been told. And in this room, some young people awaited me already. They thought I might not have made it because I was a little later than expected. And they were quite nice. They welcomed me and gave me 100 West German marks and said, "This is for you to get you through the first week." They also asked for the French passport back. And then they said, "Could we have 50 marks from your 100 because we needed to get other young people out?" The 100 marks were from the state of Berlin. And so I gave them back half of that gift with a very happy heart. And I could not have foreseen what happened then, because 4 days later, with the same passport and her picture in it, that young priest got my sister out too. So,
Wow. Do you have any idea what happened to the priest who helped you?
no, well, he had given me the name Peter, but I assume that was a pseudonym because no one really wanted to deal with names or places or whatever, because if you would be caught and interrogated, you didn't want to give anything away. So I don't know.
That's amazing. You had mentioned previous to this show that you thought that he was responsible for a number of other folks, including your sister?
Later on in a camp, I heard that by December of that year, these groups of young people, all were students at the Free University, had gotten close to 3,000 people out, all students, all young, wanting to leave. And Peter was a part of that who probably got quite a few people out.
That's amazing.
Then I also heard that late November or early in December, the communists found out how this system of getting people out had worked. And they found a way of marking the S-Bahn cards so that they knew no one came in with it, that someone else had clipped it. Or, I don't know, maybe they had marks in the passports, but they had found a system to find out who is leaving the state. So one large group of young people, I knew that they were caught and they ended up in prison.
That is tragic.
It was. For me, who had made it out, it was an indescribable feeling when you think that you were lucky and someone else was not, and that was it determined that you would get out and they would not. You think about these things for a long time.
Mm-hmm. I can't imagine that you would ever look at freedom the same way.
You are right. Freedom is something very precious, and it disturbed me highly all the years I've lived in this country that is so generous and so welcoming, that the citizens thereof are so casual and do not value what they have. Freedom really should not be given without responsibility and some appreciation for what it is. And I think we had too many people in this country who absolutely have no responsibility towards that is given.
You grew up under communism, the ultimate secular humanist culture. Now, I know you write in detail about this in your book, My Life in Freedom. But share with our viewers, if you would, how you see that culture infecting the U.S.
It is hard to describe what you feel when you see in our country certain cells being allowed to undermine what we have here, the freedoms and all the wonderful things that go with it. And yet, when I came in 1965, I noticed already communist cells in the universities and in workers' unions. And I was amazed that no one pulled the plug on them and just cleaned things out. No one did. They were under this great freedom. They were allowed to flourish. And like a cancer, they spread and took over universities first, and then the schools. And I know my husband for a while was a high school teacher, and I saw what was going on in the schools, and I was appalled. But no one ever found it to be a serious thing, and no one did anything about it until, like a cancer, it just grows. And now we are at the point where the cancer needs to be excised. And that will be very hard. I can't even imagine how we will do it.
Well, let me ask you, Sigrid, how were believing Christians treated in the East German state? And I ask this because if this cancer does continue to absorb the country, we're going to be first.
Well, you have been already for a while. I don't know if the churches for the last 25, 30 years even have been undermined, and the secularization of the churches came along with an ideology that told everyone, well, you're a Christian, you're stupid. Because if you are indoctrinated and you believe things that cannot be substantiated, and this tearing people down for their beliefs is something that the communists do, because when you have religion and faith, you cling to something spiritually higher than what is offered in daily life and materialism. And communism really wants to be the religion itself. And the funny thing was, when I was living in East Berlin, and we had a few years when the communists had pretty well laid all the churches low. They did it through different things. Some of it was materially, because they had made sure that the churches had no money to run. They applied taxes to certain things. Another thing had been that Christians would tithe through their paychecks. That all fell flat immediately. So the churches really existed on what they took in during the Saturday, Sunday service, and that was it. Then I noticed that the communists started to use sacraments and gave them, well, their sacraments, and gave them a different label. For example, the Jewish bar mitzvah and the Catholic sacrament, when a young person becomes a full member of the church, they took that and they came up with something that they called Jugendweihe. Well, Weihe means to consecrate and use consecration. And during that youth consecration, you swore your allegiance to the party. Now, that really shows where they were going, and that they just had substituted themselves for faith and religion. And we are going to undermine the family with that, because in their religion, the family was really nothing. Anyone could be family. So,
Sound familiar?
Sounds familiar.
Which of those practices do you see in the U.S. today?
Well, practically all of them. I noticed years ago that in order to pretend everyone was equal, we took away all the titles. There was no more, because once you take away the achievement of a person, then you could bring him down. And so suddenly, overnight, by taking a doctor title, Mr., Mrs., all these things that made us what we really were, had achieved in, or where's our social standing, all that was taken away, and now we were Carrie, Joe, and whatever. And every 6-year-old could walk up to a professor and say, "Hey, Joe," even so that man had given half his life to some research and been someone and something and had worked hard for it. It all fell flat. I noticed that, and that disturbed me greatly. And from then on, it was just one thing after another. Freedom of speech, substitute the reformation of the language so that you could not say certain things anymore that precisely described something. And connotations were applied to things that were absolutely outrageous. That's what I have to say about that.
I like that you speak the unspoken, Sigrid.
Well, it's the truth. So how, it's so wonderful. When you get older in life, very little matters. And you can say what you want. You don't have to impress anyone. It's freeing.
Well, you're very impressive. I'm wondering, apparently it was underground, but were the Christians in East Germany able to pass on their faith to their children?
Very good families, very solid families, of course, they did. And they managed to keep families together, and they would still go to church. And it became almost, I went to church on many Sundays as a protest, just to show we were there. And in the end, even so they had suppressed Catholicism, especially for so many years, in the end, it was Christian belief and Christian faith that ended the wall. Because, and no one here knows about this, but the Christians began every Sunday to go to church and bring all their friends. Everyone would go to church, and especially in Dresden and outlying districts. There were so many people in church for the Sunday sermon that they stood outside and listened through loudspeakers. And there were more and more every Sunday. And this eventually brought us to the point where Reagan said, Mr. Gorbachev, take down this wall. And in Poland, there were the Polish Catholics were probably the staunchest in all of Europe. And they also demonstrated by nothing but their faith and showing up in their churches, being out in the marketplace and showing their presence. And this is how we then got a Catholic Pope, the Polish Pope.
Absolutely. God bless him. Do you have a warning for today's complacent Americans?
Yes, and that is, if you vote for the way this country is going, you probably will suffer the most because you have no idea what's coming. The rest of us, we know. We can see it, we can feel it, and we will not be surprised. But those who think there can be this utopia of everyone being equal and all the money going all over and everyone living without working or doing anything to support themselves in any way, this will all come crashing down.
Well, thank you, Sigrid. This has been a monumental show. I sure hope we can have you back.
Thank you. It was a pleasure being with you.
Freedom is not free. Isn't that the expression? The price is not always a soldier taking up arms. Sometimes it's leaving our comfort zone and simply speaking up, writing a letter or taking a stand. Will we cower in the upper room or go courageously into the crowd? That's a wrap for today's show. Thank you so much for joining us. We value your time and are working on more useful content on ChantWorks.com. If you like what you see, we'd love to know. For now, look forward to our next exciting episode of Fear Not.
This has been a ChantWorks production. Please visit us online at chantworks.com.